Hello and welcome to the 22nd Peter M. Wege Lecture on Sustainability at the University of Michigan, which will be delivered shortly by world-renowned climate scientist and climate communicator, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. Katharine's remarks will be followed by a moderated Q&A with questions submitted in advance by students and others in the audience. My name is Shoshana Lenski, and I am the Associate Director of the Center for Sustainable Systems here on campus, which together with the School for Environment and Sustainability is proud to host this evening's event. As we look ahead to Katharine's talk, we acknowledge that we cannot address the impacts of climate change on the land and the environment without acknowledging the land itself. The University of Michigan is located on the territory of the Anishinaabe people. We acknowledge the sovereignty of tribal lands and the painful experiences of Native communities that facilitated the establishment of the university. We affirm contemporary and ancestral Anishinaabe ties to the land, the profound contributions of Native Americans to this institution, and the university's commitment to educate the children of Native ancestors. The university seeks to live up to this commitment as described in the honoring Article 16 of the university's DEI 2.0 strategy. For example, at SEAS with the Mathi Botanical Gardens, we are partnering with the College of Menominee Nation to become a hub of the National Science Foundation's Center for Braiding Indigenous Knowledges and Science. Another example is the new SEAS Global Center for Understanding Climate Change Impacts on Transboundary Waters, which will initially focus on climate adaptation in the Great Lakes region with an emphasis on Indigenous communities. We are privileged to participate in this important work to build a more just and sustainable future for all. Now let me ask, by a show of hands, how many of you here this evening are at your first ever Wege Lecture? Welcome, we are so delighted to have you here. And is there anyone in the audience who has been to all 21 before this? There's at least one, two there. We had last year's Mary Robinson and other illustrious speakers like Al Gore and Bill McKibben, Naomi Klein, and even His Holiness the Dalai Lama. For 2 decades, the Wege Lecture has addressed critical sustainability issues across systems, from biodiversity to energy, sustainable development, equity, health, transportation, cities, technology, and much more. The series is made possible by a generous endowment from the late Peter M. Wege and the foundation that bears his name and carries on his legacy of environmentalism. Peter was the first chair of the Center for Sustainable Systems External Advisory Board when we were founded with a competitive grant from the US EPA in 1991. Peter served as vice chairman of Steelcase, the company his father founded, and he believed deeply in the compatibility of a strong economy and environmental protections. At Steelcase, Peter pioneered green operations, collaborating with researchers at U of M and elsewhere to innovate ways to introduce pollution prevention and improve the environmental attributes of the company's products. Peter's philosophy in life was, and I quote, "to do all the good you can for all the people you can for as long as you can." I think we can agree this lecture series is a testament to how he accomplished that. The Wege Foundation tagline asks, "Is the planet worth saving?" I hope you are all here this evening because you agree that the planet Earth, and in particular the life that calls it home, is worth saving. And maybe you are looking for a few ideas for just how to go about doing that. We are all in luck because our speaker tonight literally wrote the book on that. Katharine Hayhoe is the author of Saving Us, a climate scientist's case for hope and healing in a divided world. In this book, Katharine shares incredibly compelling stories about how she has connected with people from all walks of life and connected them to climate change. While she doesn't shy away from the facts and the science, she reaches them through their shared interests, priorities, and values, and helps them understand how climate change impacts them personally and motivates them to action. Katharine describes each of our actions as like knocking over the first domino, beginning a cascade that builds momentum, inspires our friends and neighbors, changes social norms, and eventually changes all of us. Katharine demonstrates masterfully the art of meeting people where they're at, figuratively and literally, in town halls and church basements and even on the internet, where she very well may be the internet troll's worst enemy. In fact, recent SEAS research confirmed that Katharine Hayhoe is one of the key social media influencers in the climate change sphere. Our own center, CSS, was cited in a news article about Taylor Swift, and Katharine retweeted our research in the same week. I don't know which of those made us go more wobbly in the knees. Katharine bears the official titles of Chief Scientist for the Nature Conservancy and the Paul Whitfield Horn Distinguished Professor and the Political Science Endowed Chair in Public Policy and Public Law in the Department of Political Science at Texas Tech University. She also was a lead author for 3 U.S. national climate assignments, co-founder of Science Moms, and she's been named one of Time 100's most influential people. So you can see why she has also earned the very unofficial title of Climate Badass. One of Katharine's key messages and the title of her TED Talk is that the most important thing you can do to fight climate change is to talk about it. So without further ado, let's let her talk about it. Please join me in a very warm welcome for Dr. Katharine Hayhoe.
Thank you so much. It is wonderful to be here. As many of you know, I am from just across the river, so to speak, from Toronto. So Ann Arbor feels very close to home. We're going to be having a conversation tonight, and in the spirit of a conversation, I wanted to begin by asking you a few questions. So if you don't mind, go ahead and take out your phone. Now's a good time to turn the ringer off if you didn't do that already. There's always someone. And you can open the camera app and you can take a picture of this QR code. Or if you are good with your fingers, you can actually type in the address. The address is pollev.com/Katharine. I will warn you, if you're typing, though, there's always someone who doesn't spell Katharine with 2 A's. So the QR code is the better way to go if you want to make sure you get it right. And when you go there, the first question is a very easy question. I just want to know who you are. So that question is already open. I'll just wait for a couple of people to finish getting this QR code here. And if you miss it, the QR code is going to be at the top of the next question too. So let me ask you now, who are you? Are you I still see a phone or two up. Are you an undergraduate student, a grad student or postdoc, faculty or staff, university alumni, community member, listening online? We've got people listening online. You can do this too if you're listening online, but you can't do it if it's recorded. I'm not saying that for you. I'm saying that for people later on or other. All right. And if you missed the QR code, it is right there at the top, and you can also type in the address. Okay. So it looks like we have a quarter of the people here are graduate students or postdocs, and then almost a quarter are faculty and staff. And then we've got alumni very well represented, and a tie between undergraduate students and community members. And we have a small, but still there, proportion of other. Excellent. Okay. So that got you warmed up, and now I have a more difficult question for you. And as we go along, I'll have a couple more, so you can keep your phone handy. The next question I have for you is more difficult because you have to give me a word. Only one word. Any word, but only one. So this next question is, when I say climate change, or when you see an article on climate change flash by your screen, or when you hear something in the news about climate change, how do you feel? How do you feel? This is anonymous, nobody's tracking what you say. You can see why I asked you for one word. This is a wordle. The more people who say a word, the bigger it is. And I'm going to be honest, I am not surprised by what I see here. When I wrote Saving Us, I wrote it in response to the fact that the number one question that I, as a climate scientist, was getting back 4 or 5 years ago is, what gives you hope? Or the flip side is, are we screwed? And so the very first time I gave a talk about my book, it was during the pandemic, so it was a virtual talk. It was to a group of parents at a science museum in Utah. I remember that very well. I decided to ask them this question for the first time. I had never asked anyone this question before. But in writing Saving Us, I had learned that the first most important step, if we're going to talk about such a difficult issue, psychologists tell us, is to acknowledge how we feel. Now, you can imagine for a physical scientist, that is not in our comfort zone. But I'm committed to doing everything we can to fix this. And so if psychologists say we got to talk about our feelings, I will talk about our feelings. And I will talk about my feelings too, and I will say I identify with pretty much everything you've put here. Except for disinterested, I'm very interested. Other than that, yes. Not totally sure about stinky either, but it is your feeling and I acknowledge it and I respect it. So I asked this group of parents at a science museum in Utah how they felt, and there weren't as many of them. But if I compared their top answers to yours, we would see almost the same words. After that, I was speaking to a group of healthcare professionals and I asked them. Very similar. A group of green architects, almost identical. A set of Catholic nuns, almost the same. When we look around the world, we see, and this is the first most important thing I want you to know, that if you feel worried, afraid, depressed, paralyzed, frustrated, angry about climate change, you are not alone. And that's really important to know. A survey of 10,000 young people in a number of different countries around the world showed that most were worried, either extremely, very, or moderately. Only 16% were not. And when they were asked what emotions they felt about climate change, well, doesn't this list look familiar? Sad, afraid, anxious, angry, powerless, guilty, a little optimistic, and then there was indifferent right there. These are the number of people around the United States who are worried about global warming. These are results from last year. Anywhere that's blue is less than 50%, but you can see the blue areas are pretty light blue. Anywhere that's orange is more than 50%, and you can see this county right here, 74% of people in this county are worried. I live in Texas, and Texas is not blue. In fact, a new survey just last September found that 42% of registered Republican voters in Texas were worried about climate change. And over 95% of registered Democrat voters were worried. When we look around the world, now the gray areas were not surveyed. Only the countries with colors were surveyed. And the line is a little different here. Here, red or orange or pink is greater than 60%, not 50%. But you can see that in every country, other than countries where they literally don't know if they'll have a safe place to live tomorrow or enough food to give their children tomorrow, in every other country, just about, we see, and again, the gray ones were not surveyed, we see that they are pink, even red. So I mentioned earlier, the number one question I've been asked for years now is, what gives you hope? What gives you hope? But about a year or two ago, I noticed this question shifting. This question started shifting, and now, you know what the number one question I get is? It's the question I was asked to address in this lecture. What can we do about it? And that is intimately connected with hope, because as you will see, what neuroscience tells us, what psychology tells us, what social science tells us, what our own common sense tells us, is that action is intimately connected with hope. So in asking, what can I do? That is a question that in neuroscience or psychological terms means, what can I do to find hope? Like, that's the actual question. What can I do means, what can I do to find hope? And you can see in recent years, there's been a huge rise in the number of resources available, excellent resources by folks on how to live in a chaotic climate, a field guide to climate anxiety. My own book is called Saving Us, a case for hope and for healing. But the second thing that I want you to know is, first of all, you're not alone. But second of all, if you are worried about this issue, even if you are anxious about this issue, if you are panicked about this issue, that is a rational response to what's happening. In fact, the National Association of Psychologists got together last year to talk about the increase in climate anxiety that's been happening in this country over the last number of years. In fact, back in 2019, eco-anxiety was the Webster Dictionary word of the year already, and that was 5 years ago. So the psychologist said, it is not a syndrome or a condition because it is a logical, rational response to what is happening. Should you not be worried? Yes, the science is clear that we should be worried. In fact, as far back as we go in the paleoclimate history of this planet, millions of years, the worse what's happening today looks. And now you might say, or you might know somebody who would say, but doesn't she know it's been warmer before? And my answer to that is yes, we climate scientists are the ones who study that. The reason you know is because we studied it and told you. But what we learned from the past is we have never seen conditions changing this quickly. The only time we've seen changes this fast, it's only happened 5 times, and those 5 times have been characterized by a word that we want to avoid at all costs: extinctions. We have never seen this much carbon going into the atmosphere this quickly. In fact, at the warmest recent time, 55 million years ago, when it was warmer than today, our best estimate is that the amount of carbon going into the atmosphere naturally, because of course it was natural 55 million years ago, was 1/10 what we're putting in today. So the speed of change is unprecedented, and the warming that we're seeing in response is already unprecedented in human history. And why does this matter? It matters because we've never had 8 billion people on the planet before, all of whom are living in buildings that were built based on what? Past climate conditions. That are consuming water that was allocated based on what? Past water conditions. Eating food that was grown using what principles? The principles we learned from the way climate was in the past, not the way it is today. And it's not only about the changes in the averages, we are seeing a massive change in our extremes. What I often refer to as global weirding, because wherever we live, things are getting weird. Back in the 1980s, there was $1 billion climate and weather disaster in the United States on average every 4 months. Accounting for how the value of the dollar changes over time, but also recognizing we have a lot more infrastructure now than we did back in the 1980s. By the 2010s, there was one every 2.8 weeks, and this last year, there was one every 1.8 weeks. It is not your imagination. Climate change is supersizing these events. And at the cutting edge of science is the field of attribution, where we can put a number on how much worse climate change made a specific event. We can say that the brutal heat wave in June 2021 out west was 150 times more likely because of climate change loading the weather dice against us. The floods they had in Germany the same year were 9 times more likely. The rain that fell during Hurricane Harvey was 3 times more likely. The economic damages were $67 billion greater. And the science has even gone so far that not only can we quantify the human fingerprint, as we call it, on a given event, how much more likely, how much bigger, how much stronger, how much greater area was flooded, how much more money it cost. A new study this past year showed that we can even tie it directly back to where those emissions came from. 88 corporations are responsible for 37% of the area burned in wildfires across the whole Western North America since 1980. And why do we care about this? As you know, it's affecting the air we breathe. Who here was here when the smoke from the Canadian wildfires came down last summer? Yes. Yes, a lot of hands. You know what that feels like. It's affecting the water that we drink. It's affecting the food that we eat. Since the 1980s, we've been losing $5 billion worth of crops a year. That number is probably actually a lot higher now. We've been losing $5 billion worth of crops a year due to climate-related disasters, many of those crop losses in some of the poorest parts of the world. And as I mentioned, all of our infrastructure, our buildings, our roads, our bridges, our culverts, even the asphalt we use, it's all designed for a planet that doesn't exist anymore. We are completely unprepared for what's happening, and even nature itself has never coped with changes this fast, especially when it's also coping with habitat degradation, biodiversity loss, the impact of pollution. Nature does not need us. We need it. We depend on nature for the air we breathe. Half of the oxygen actually in our atmosphere comes from tiny phytoplankton in the ocean. How often do you think about phytoplankton? Probably not much, but you think about the air you're breathing probably pretty frequently. The food we eat, the water we drink, all the goods we use to make everything, including this beautiful wood stage I'm standing on, where did it come from? It came from nature. All of our lives depend on the ability of our planet to support our lives, our civilization, our well-being. And so that's why I say it's not about saving the planet. The planet will be orbiting the sun long after we're gone. It is quite literally about saving us. And I put an asterisk on the us because by us, I mean all of the living things on this planet. Humans cannot survive without all of the rest of the ecosystems on this planet that provide everything we use. They can survive without us. We cannot survive without them. So if you feel this way, if you're worried, if you're concerned, if you're frustrated, if you're paralyzed, you're not alone. This is a rational response. And this is really interesting. Worry has a purpose. There is a reason that humans worry about things. It's so we will do something about them. Think about it. If you're not worried about something, if you don't think it's a problem, would you do anything about it? Probably not, right? If there's a problem, then our natural instinct is to try to figure out what we can do. And so these emotions that we feel that are rational responses to what we're seeing, they can be constructive emotions if we know what to do. So let's dig into this a little bit more because this is a really interesting one. And this is where I feel like our biggest misunderstandings are occurring. So I want to go back and ask you another question here. I'm curious. Go ahead and take out your phone. If you didn't get the QR code, it's up there on the top. If you're listening online, you can join in too. Go back to your phone, and I want to know, on climate action, and again, this is anonymous, not tracking who you are, so just be honest. On climate action, do you feel that you are doing enough? Would you like to do more? Would you like to do a lot more? Or do you feel, I'm not doing hardly anything at all? Okay. This is, full disclosure, the first time I've ever asked a group this question. So I had a hypothesis, but I didn't know what I was going to get. And I'm glad to see that my hypothesis was correct. My hypothesis is that you would reflect what I see in the larger data. And that is that what percentage of us, let me go here, what percentage of us replied with negative words here? Almost all these words are negative, right? I would guess between 90 to 95% of the words here are negative. But although we feel worry, we feel concern, we feel it's a problem, almost all of us, 90%, 89, oh, we're still moving a bit, 89%, okay. 89% of us feel like we should be doing more. Okay, so keep that in your head. 95% of us are worried, 89% of us feel like we should be doing more. Okay, so this summer when all the disasters happened, the wildfires, the floods, the heat waves, every time I went on social media, every time I went on LinkedIn or Threads or Blue Sky, every time I went online, I saw someone saying, if this isn't enough, nothing is. The wildfires in Northwest Territories, the wildfires in British Columbia, the wildfires in the Canary Islands, the wildfires in Nova Scotia, the hot tub temperature seawater off the coast of Florida, the floods here, the droughts here, the record heat here. If this isn't enough, nothing is, they would say. And it got so common, I literally had like a little response sitting on my desktop that I would copy and paste in. And I started to sound like a broken record because this is what I know. We think, that we're worried, and everybody we know is worried, but all those other people who don't want to talk about it, they're not worried, we think. And if they're not worried, what do we need to do? We need to make them worried. So climate changes, and we're worried, and what do? We load up on all the scary and true facts about ocean temperatures and ocean circulation and ice sheets and polar bears and tipping points. And we share this with people. What happens? Exactly. You're the right person to be in the front row. You're invited to all my talks. People reject it even more, and inaction results. As I was writing my book, I did the typical academic thing, which is I went out and I bought 85 other books first, and I read them. I was afraid, as all academics are, I'd be saying something that either was not accurate or did not reflect people who'd already done it before. And one of the most interesting books I read was a book by a neuroscientist called The Influential Mind. And in it, she said, in regards to this, and she's not writing about climate change, she's only writing about how the human brain works. She said, fear and anxiety will cause us to withdraw, to freeze, to give up rather than take action. I'm like, where has she been all our lives? So then I look at the data and I realize that when we look at the polling data around the country, this is not what people look like. This is what people look like. In the US, 2/3 of people are worried, and do you know what percent in the US are activated? 8%. So if this is the landscape, what's the most important thing for us to do? Is the most important thing for us to go to that neighbor, that uncle, that coworker who is obsessed with the idea that climate change is a hoax and those climate scientists are in it for the money and CO2 is good for the planet and actually it's getting colder, not warmer? Is that the person that we need to spend the most of our time on? It isn't. If we have someone like that in our life, and I, to be honest, have only ever met one person who doesn't, I have 2 family members myself, I say, I love you, you're wrong, and now let's talk about something else. Where I want to spend my energy is on people who are worried, but they don't know what to do. That is a huge group of movable people. And in fact, as I have learned, it's 89% of you too who want to do more. So a new study just came out a couple of months ago, and what it found is, quoting, and in the back we have one of those scary figures I see on social media all the time, scary figures about record warm ocean temperatures get the most clicks and the most likes and the most shares. So people are motivated to share them, whether it's in the media or on social media. That's what gets the eyes on it. But they are the absolute worst at motivating people to act, the researchers found. So we're growing the blue. Okay, that's good, we're growing the blue. But the green is actually shrinking. which is not what we want. The whole world could be blue, and that would be just as bad. In fact, honestly, personally, if everybody was worried but we didn't know what to do, I'd rather not be worried. So what do we have to do? We have to address the real issues, which is not lack of worry, because you're all worried, but you want to do more. So is more worry going to make you do more? I'm going to venture to say it might paralyze you more. What we need to understand is we need to make what I call the head-to-heart connection, and then we need to make the heart-to-hands connection. We are all in our heads. We have all the information about how bad it is and all the worry and all the concern. It's all in our heads. We have to connect that to our hearts. How is it affecting the people, the places, the things I love in my life? And then we have to connect our hearts to our hands. What can we do to make a difference? The head-to-heart gap has a name. It's called psychological distance. And this is what we humans do with risks when we don't know how to fix them. We push them away from us. We say they're distant from us in time or space or relevance. And this is exactly what people do with climate change. When you ask people, is global warming happening? Most people say yes. Is it going to affect plants and animals? Where's the psychological distance? Non-human species. Yes. Plants and animals? Yes. Will it harm people in the future? Yes. Will it harm people who live over there? Yes. Will it harm you? And just in case you thought this is different, not so different, 2% different. This is the head-to-heart gap. And I just wanted to show you the global data. This is worry about climate change. It's mostly pink. Will it harm future generations? Still largely pink. Will it harm you? Humans are humans. So how do we close the head-to-heart gap? We have to talk about what's happening now, not in the future. What's happening here, not over there. What's happening in concrete, relevant terms that we care about, rather than what's happening to abstract things that are irrelevant to our lives. That's the head-to-heart connection. But there's a second thing we have to do, and that is we have to make the heart-to-hands connection. How do we do that? People want solutions that give us something better, not worse. Humans are conditioned to fear loss more than we value gain. Let me say that again. We're conditioned to fear loss more than we value gain, yet what are climate solutions couched primarily in terms of? Loss. You can't do this, you can't eat this, you can't have this, you can't go there. It gets to the point where you're like, well, what else is there left in life? And so we have inadvertently taken the exact wrong approach to persuading humans to do anything when we're talking about these solutions. Now, do solutions really give us a better life? Well, yeah. Millions of people die every year from the air pollution from burning fossil fuels. We waste half the food we produce while people go hungry. We live in cities where low-income neighborhoods are up to 10 or 15 degrees hotter than high-income neighborhoods in the same city during a heat wave. We live in a world where energy is getting more and more expensive, so much so that most of the inflation that's happening today is because of fossil fuels, and so economists are calling it fossilflation. There are solutions that will give us a better world. And people are willing to make those changes if they feel what they do can make a difference. But when Americans are surveyed, 50% of Americans feel helpless, hopeless, and don't know what to do. 50%. So a big part of what we need to share with people is that the giant boulder of climate action is not sitting there with only a few hands on it. That, probably Greta. It's also got Sir David Attenborough, but he's 96. Al Gore's been pushing on that thing ever since he gave the lecture here, and actually probably a few years before that. But it's just not budging. So if I add my hand, what's going to happen? That's lack of efficacy. How do we address that? Well, the same study that found that the doom-filled headlines get the most clicks, but they're absolute worst at getting people to do anything, the same study found that what gets people motivated is recognizing that this is the true picture. That we're not alone, that there's millions of hands on the boulder, that it's already rolling down the hill in the right direction, that there are schools and universities, there are businesses and companies, there are Girl Scout troops and churches and community organizations and cities. There are so many people taking action on climate change. You could have a new story every day of the year and you would be going for years and you would never run out because there's always more. So 2 years ago this week, I started a newsletter. If you want the newsletter, you can take a picture, it's free. And I do not finance my research by selling your email addresses, just to be clear. And in it, I tried to practice the head, heart, hands connection. So in the newsletter, every week I start with a section in green called Good News. That's the hands, telling us what's happening that's good. Then I have not so good news in red. That's the heart. I don't talk about icebergs and polar bears. I talk about coffee, bananas, health, our kids' sports, our gardens, things that matter to our lives. And then I have a section in blue, what you can do, every week. So I've been trying this out and I've been hearing from people, and people say, some people even say, this is the only thing I can bring myself to read about climate change. And I'm gonna be honest, I skipped the red part. I'm like, that's okay, that's why it's in red. Somebody even asked, could you just put it in like a little pop down? I was like, no, MailChimp doesn't let you do that. So I've been trying this out. And so I just wanted to share with you what's been giving me hope this week. I look on a regular basis for hope, and a Detroit native is one of the people who gave me hope today. Zanaya Kelly is one of the first AmeriCorps interns. They're actually getting paid to get a job to help fix climate change. Isn't that amazing? She's from right here. I was also encouraged by a news article that shared something I've been aware of for a while, that thanks to actions we have already taken since the Paris Agreement was signed, the projected change in temperature by the end of the century has decreased noticeably. This is what we expect to happen by 2100. It has gone down in 10 years because of our choices. I think that's pretty good. Is it enough? No. Is it moving in the right direction? Yes. Remember, giant boulder? Hasn't gotten to the bottom of the hill, but it's rolling down the hill in the right direction. And then I just saw today, did you imagine that these companies would be the top buyers of renewable energy? That's pretty interesting and pretty encouraging. The yellow is solar and the blue is wind. So how do we tackle psychological distance and how do we build efficacy? It turns out there's one thing that all of us can do that is so simple that we just skip right over it mentally and we're not doing it. How do I know we're not doing it? The maps, of course. Here's where we left off. Do you think global warming will harm us personally? Most people say no. 48% of people here think it will, 52% think it won't. There's one map that's darker blue. Do you ever talk about it? Do you ever talk about it? Now here you're doing a little better, you're 46%, but that's still below 50%. And we see this around the world. This is that map, do you worry about climate change? And then they asked, researchers asked, do you ever hear about it? Now, I want to point out something on this map. People often say, I'm just one person, what difference can I make? I do not have proof, but I have a strong suspicion that this map is showing us the influence a single person can have. How? By their impact on the people around them, and by those people's impact on the people around them. I suspect that the reason there is a small group of dark pink countries up at the top there is because one 13-year-old girl decided to take a piece of white cardboard and write "School Strike for Climate" on that piece of white cardboard and sit outside a building. I think this map shows us the impact of a single human being making a decision to talk about it. Is that not hopeful? Because if you don't talk about it, why would you care? And if you don't care, why would you ever do anything about it? So climate changes and we get worried. Remember this? What do you do at this point? You should know the answer, right? Do you load up on all the scary facts? No. Do you figure out how to connect the head to the heart to the hands? Yes. Talk about how it affects us and talk about what positive solutions look like at any scale. What happens? People feel empowered and action results. Why? Because that's the way our brains are wired. Back to the neuroscience, the human brain is built to associate forward action with a reward, not with avoiding harm. Our brains are not built to move forward to avoid harm, so reframe your message so the information you provide will induce hope, not dread. Again, this was not a book about climate change. She was writing about the human brain. We have framed all of our messaging so much around fear that when I share one hopeful piece of news on social media, I get 10 people accusing me of selling hopium and deceiving people. Every day I have people accusing me of deceiving people and telling them that that it's not as bad. And I'm like, no, didn't you see my previous post? It's really bad. But there's hope. So people might say, well, enough talking. We need action. And to that, I would offer the words of journalist Sarah Peach. She says, talk is the fertile field in which cultural change begins. In its absence, it's impossible for a group of people to solve a problem. The goal is not to tell people about climate change. The goal is to expand the number of people in the conversation. So if you feel this way, you're not alone. It's a rational response. Worry is good if we know what to do. And lastly, and this is what I want to end on, effective action is fueled by hope and love. Now, this is interesting because I came to this conclusion through my faith. I'm a Christian, and one of my favorite Bible verses has nothing to do with nature or creation or the earth. It's a verse that says, God is not the author of fear, but has given you a spirit of power meaning you can do something as opposed to be paralyzed, love, which means you can care for others, and a sound mind, which I interpret as making good decisions, which includes decisions based on science. So I came to this conclusion through my faith, but the more I've been researching and studying motivation and human psychology and how we catalyze social change, I realized this is a profoundly human concept. St. Augustine was the one who wrote, well over almost 2,000 years ago, hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see they do not remain as they are. Is that not relevant to us today? Real hope is not positive, magical thinking. In fact, you don't need hope when everything's going well. When do you need hope? When it's not going well. That's when you need it. So if we're worried, if we're concerned, if we're anxious, if we're sad, we are right in the first part of hope. You have to realize it's bad before you need hope. Real hope recognizes it's bad and it's getting worse. Success is not inevitable. If it is, you don't need hope. You don't need hope if success is inevitable. You need hope if it is not inevitable. But what hope does is it provides us with a vision of a better future and with a path to get there that includes a way for all of us to contribute. So along those lines, in addition to hope, I have become increasingly convinced that climate action must include recharging our batteries with love. And by that I mean spending time doing the things we love with the people we love in the places we love. If we don't do that, we're running an ultra marathon here, people. This is not the 100-meter dash. You cannot run an ultra marathon longer than anybody's ever run before with 8 billion of us at the same time if we do not recharge. And the batteries that we are running on are charged with love. I'm part of an organization called Potential Energy that I helped start our Science Moms organization with. And Potential Energy, they're all about the numbers and the statistics. They do really quantitative analysis on messaging and framing. And so they recently completed a global study trying to figure out what motivates people to act. Is it the news about jobs in the clean energy industry? Is it blaming the fossil fuel companies? Is it telling people how bad it is? They tested all these messages around the whole world. And I got to go to their presentation when they were rolling out these results, 95 slides. Don't worry, I don't have 95, we're almost done. 95 very, very detailed slides with numbers and statistics on it. And then they got to the end. And the guy giving the presentation is, a numbers guy. And so we got to the end. He said, well, we found across the world there was one message that was absolutely top in terms of what motivates people to act. And he said that one message was, and he sort of coughed a little bit because it's not a very quantitative message. He said that one message was love. And I kind of laughed because I was like, yes, I knew it. Wherever we are, love. Love for our children, love for the next generation, love for our friends, love for the place that we feel so attached to. Love is what motivates people to act around the world because, as you've seen from the maps I showed you, we're all humans. The one thing we need more than hope is action. Once we start to act, and I would add, if I could, out of love, hope is everywhere. So if we know that, then the only question I have left is, what are we waiting for? We know what to do. So I want to ask you one last question before we get to your questions. And my last question for you is this. When you say climate change now, how do you feel? When you say climate change now, how do you feel? And if you still feel one of these words, that's okay. We're in this for the long haul, and I feel these words. Every day I feel some of these words, believe me. But do you feel any different words? Do you feel challenged? Do you feel motivated? Do you feel hopeful? Do you feel interested? Oh, I love that. Do you feel empowered? Yes. Now, I left this up on purpose rather than using a new one because these emotions are still with us. Like I said, I practice hope on a regular basis, but now I know what to do. I know what makes a difference. I know how we can catalyze change, and it starts with us, each one of us, but by practicing it ourselves, we can change those around us. And this has never been a more important time to focus not so much on our personal carbon footprint, but on our climate shadow, how we affect people around us. So I want to close with the words of a previous Wege lecturer, Bill McKibben. He was here a number of years ago. He said something, I think, which is really powerful. He said, the most important thing an individual can do right now is not be such an individual. And how do you do that? The number one thing is to connect with people around you to help them understand how to connect their head with their heart with their hands, how climate action and advocating for solutions, it isn't just scientists who do it, it isn't just advocates or activists, it isn't just environmentalists. If you're a human being living on this planet, if you breathe the air, if you drink the water, if you eat the food, you are the perfect person to care. Every one of us has the ability to share with everyone around us that that's who they are. And so again, I will leave you with Bill's challenge. The most important thing you can do is not be such an individual, and I will add mine to that, and that means that having a conversation is the first most important thing that you can do. Thank you. So now I would like to invite my friend and fellow climate scientist and someone who just so happens to be the dean of the School for Environment and Sustainability, Jonathan Overpeck, or Peck as many of you know him, to come up to the stage. Peck.
So is that a climate badass or what? I love that.
I think I'm going to make that my new official bio, if you don't mind.
Yes, that should be on your CV. That's academic for resume. Hey, you know, I want to ask, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to ask the students, I'm going to introduce you, and you're going to give your question, but see if you can shorten them up a little to really get to the heart of your question, okay? Because we only have a little more time, and I love your questions, so we want to get to them. But I just want to highlight a personal note. It was 15 years ago, I think, or a little longer, that we first worked together on a national climate assessment. And back then it was amazing, and to me anyhow, is that the kind of climate chaos, extreme events, billion-dollar disasters, were just starting to tick up. And we said all these things are going to happen. And they have all happened, started to really happen in an unequivocal way. But the other thing that really gives me hope is that look at where we are now as a country compared to then. You know, we are really acting on climate. We have an administration that is just badass too. And you look at China and what they're doing, and you look at the European Union and what they're doing. We have a lot of the planet now working on climate change. And the big point I sort of focus on is it's just not going fast enough. So that's the bad news. But I really loved your strategy for let's pick it up. And in particular, you know, this is a big year, a big election year. We have to make sure that climate action is front and center as people go to the polls, and that we get people who really care about climate to go to the polls. So that's the only thing I would add. But I'd like to go now to the student questions, if I could, please, because there's some good questions here, and they're ready to shorten up their questions. The first one is...
if you don't, I'll shorten up my answers, don't worry.
Okay, yeah, we got to go quick. But I think there's some real insights here. Malika Kothari, you're going to go first. I can't see anything with the lights. There you are.
Thank you so much for a wonderful talk and for being here today. My name is Malika, and I'm a PhD student at the School for Environment and Sustainability. And my research is on renewable energy and specifically resilient strategies for a net zero neighborhood. My question for you today is, as PhD students working with other students here at Michigan, how can we improve our ability to talk and teach others how to communicate on climate change issues? Specifically, how can I recognize that the words and phrases I may be comfortable using because I come from a technical background like yours may not help others from differentiated backgrounds find a voice communicating climate change impacts? How did you navigate this coming from two different technical fields into a professorship and your role at the Nature Conservancy? Thank you.
Thank you. That is a great question because I run into this issue all the time, where we use words that might mean something radically different to someone else, even though it's the same word. Or we might be using a word that they don't know what it means, or they're using a word that I don't know what it means. So clear communication requires us to be vulnerable and to be willing to say, which is often very hard for academics, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand. Could you please explain it to me? It requires us to ask questions and listen, because when we're tempted to come in with the solution, well, history is littered with the solutions people develop for other people who were not involved in developing those solutions. So co-production of knowledge is something that a lot of us have been working on for a very long time, which is working with people and producing knowledge and information and policies and changes with them rather than for them. And that requires relationship, it requires conversation, and it requires, asking after you've said something, did that make sense? What did you think, what did you think of that? And listening very carefully. Listening and talking is really at the center of working together. And so it all gets back to that thing I said that we all do, but we don't even think about it because it's so simple, is talking to each other and listening to each other. So thank you, great question.
Yeah, I think that answer was good too. Thank you for that good question. Because academics like to think the knowledge is what we produce and that we are the only ones that produce it. And that is so far from the truth, because the knowledge we need to solve these problems involve lived experience, practice in whatever jobs you have out there. And it's when we combine those sources of knowledge that we come up through co-production, is a fancy word for it, when we really come up with solutions that work. Yeah, so that's really great. Okay, the next question is from another PhD candidate, Papa Yoa Owahusu Oben. And I'm sorry, I'm sort of butchering your name.
Okay, thank you for a wonderful presentation. My name is Papayao Owusu Oben. I'm a third-year PhD candidate in the School for Environment and Sustainability. So given the widening disparities in socioeconomic and environmental impact as a result of climate change, what role can we play as students, members of the community, or even faculty in empowering local communities to access resources for adaptation and resilience building?
That is a great question because we know that climate change affects us all, but it does not affect us all equally. And people who are already marginalized, who are already vulnerable, who already lack resources, are the most affected. And this is true whether they are living in Ann Arbor or Detroit, or whether they're a small shareholder farmer on the other side of the world. In fact, actually, back in the 1990s, the biggest socioeconomic disparity was between countries, and now the biggest socioeconomic disparities are within countries. So when we talk about solutions, I feel very strongly that we need solutions with multiple wins. We need solutions that address multiple issues at the same time. And the good news is we have them. We have climate solutions that address health and climate, that give us cleaner and more abundant water and help with climate, that clean up our air and help with climate, that contribute to equity and justice, more affordable housing, more affordable energy, and help with climate. We have solutions that make us more resilient to disasters and help with climate. One, let me just give you one so you know what I'm talking about. For example, I mentioned earlier how in the same city, lower income neighborhoods are much hotter during heat waves because they don't have green space. So greening low income neighborhoods, first of all, keeps them cooler during heat waves. Second, it filters the air because typically air pollution levels are higher in those neighborhoods. Third, it provides a place for water to go when it rains, so it reduces flood risk. Fourth, it provides a place for people to go outside, which we know is so good for our physical and mental health to spend time in nature. Oh, and fifth, it also takes up carbon, but at that point, it's like the icing on the cake. So these are the types of win-win-win solutions we need. We cannot afford single wins for climate. We need wins for people, the planet, and climate together. And the good news is, again, we have those solutions, and those are the ones we need to be prioritizing.
Great, and this is another reason why we have to really talk and converse to figure out everyone on the planet has got ways to benefit from climate action and going for a more sustainable and just planet. And just means everyone has to benefit. And we have to just make that a priority. And that's another thing that's happening now. For the first time in my life, we have a federal government who recognizes the importance of that, because humans have done all sorts of transitions in the past. And if we can be just and give everyone benefits, we can also speed things up. It's a brilliant reason to move faster, but it also is a moral reason. Okay. I have one more student question. We're in extra time here. And I think this is from Emma Norian.
Yes, hello. I'm a second-year dual degree master's student in Cs in the College of Engineering and Civil Engineering and studying ecosystem science and management and sustainable water systems at Cs. This semester, I took a course titled Leadership for Turning Climate Anxiety into Climate Action, where we created resources for managing climate anxiety and how to cultivate hope to take action, right in line with your talk today, which is wonderful. My question for you is, what climate emotions do you feel, and how do you maintain positivity and active hope in the face of the climate crisis? Thanks.
That is a great question. And like I asked you, I often feel many of the same feelings. I feel frustrated at the slow pace of action. I feel worried when I see the changes that are happening in the climate system today. I feel sometimes overwhelmed and paralyzed by all the things there are to do and how little it seems like I accomplished that day. So what I do is I actively practice hope. I realized, because you know, what gets the most clicks is the doom-filled headlines, right? So I realized if I didn't actually go look for hopeful information, it wasn't gonna find me. There's no algorithm that's already pre-programmed to find you with hopeful information. So what I did was I started to specifically train my news algorithm to give me hopeful information. It took a while, but I'm finally starting to get it there. I follow accounts on social media that share positive information. I pass it on whenever I hear about it. I figured out, which websites, which organizations offer positive information about solutions and things that are happening. And now it's gotten to the point where, like I said in my newsletter, I practice active hope by sharing that with people around me. I was worried I was going to run out of good news when I started that newsletter, and now I'm cheating. I've got 2 or 3 good news pieces in every week. So hope, you have to practice it like a muscle. Imagine you're training for the Olympics. You're not going to just show up day 1 in Paris and be like, oh, well, I hope I'm okay. No, you're going to be practicing as hard as you can. And I've found that the more I practice, the easier it gets. But make no mistake, there's still the downtimes, and that's normal, because how could it not be given what we're confronted with? But the more hands I see that are on that giant boulder pushing it down the hill, the more realistic, muscular hope, so to speak, I feel. And that, I feel, is what we all need, because without hope, if we decide we're doomed, because what is the opposite of hope? Hope is saying there's nothing we can do. If we decide there's nothing we can do, we will do nothing. And then we really will be doomed. So that's why I think practicing hope is so essential. And if you don't mind, if I could turn the question on you, what emotions do you feel about this issue? Fellow climate scientist.
I certainly have hope, and you gave me more hope. But my big emotion that I've always had as a climate scientist, from the moment I met you and before, is we got to fight. And maybe that's just because, I played sports and I'm used to that kind of mentality. But, this to me is a long haul battle to save the planet. And with that, I'd sort of like to, let's drink another and toast this audience. I want to toast you, climate badass, but I want to also toast everyone in the room, because this year is so important that we get out and we get climate-friendly politicians elected, and we get the job done and we ratchet it up. This state has one of the most aggressive climate action plans of any state in the union. We got to do it in Michigan, but we also have to do it in the United States of America and around the planet. So let's toast them. All right? Now, I just cleverly got our glasses out of the way so you can see Katharine with 2 A's book. And I also want everyone to read her book and hone their muscles, I think, as it's multiple muscles, to be an Olympic hoper, okay? We're gonna get the job done, and thank you so much for coming to this Wege Lecture.